God's vision statement for Joshua. I'm going to read here chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross all the land of the Hittites, and as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun. That's going to be your territory. That's called a stretch goal. Do you know what a stretch goal is? Tom, you know what a stretch goal is, huh?
Just beyond your grasp.
Yeah. This one's beyond your grasp and maybe a little further. Think about the real estate there. We'll put it in modern times, okay? So we have a good idea where the nation of Israel is, and that's what we're talking about. And he says, here's the boundaries. The Mediterranean, we've got that. Then you're going to go north to Lebanon. But you're not going to stop there. I want you to take over the land of the Hittites. You go, what's the land of the Hittites? We don't know. 14th century BC, the land of the Hittites was Lebanon, on up north, all the way into Turkey. They had almost the entire peninsula, or whatever you call it, land mass there of Turkey. That's a big chunk of real estate. Then he says all the way over to the great river Euphrates. That takes in which countries? It takes in Syria, half of Iraq, and then you got to come down and you're going to pick up Jordan and a chunk of Saudi Arabia there as you come across. That's a stretch goal. You got maybe 1 to 2 million people to occupy that. And that's a big chunk. Iraq has about 25 million people live in it. Currently, Israel has 9.2 million. Lebanon has, I didn't check that, but millions. And Turkey has got a lot of people. And how many people is Joshua leading? 1 to 2 million, right in that range. It's one thing to take the land, but then you got to what? You have to maintain it. You have to occupy it. If you don't have enough people to cover that, then the raiders are going to come in and take over what you've claimed. But God set a stretch goal, a big vision for Joshua. He says, this is the dimensions of the promised land, and you're going to take it. Wow. He says, every place that you put the sole of your foot, that's your territory. You put your foot down within those boundaries, I give it to you. That's my gift. Did Jesus ever say anything like that to us or to his disciples, which got translated to us? I bet we're going to talk about that this morning. I bet we might have a question over here that talks about that. So lodge that one in your mind. We're going to explore that in a little bit. Verse 5, God's personal promise to Joshua is his presence. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you, and I will not forsake you. God promises that no man's going to stand before Joshua. How's that? How do you accomplish that? I have a feeling in the rest of this study that we go on here, we're going to find out that's because God's in front of Joshua. He's one step ahead of us every step along the way. There's nobody going to stand in front of him because God's leading the pack. He's taking them out right up in front. We will learn that the battle belongs to who? Us? The battle belongs to God, period. When we get the idea that we can just go out and take territory on our own, look out. You're in deep, deep trouble. You better be looking up before you're looking out. Look up before you look out. So he promises him his presence. Okay, just like Moses, I will be with you. Joshua has to have a flashback right there. Moses would leave wherever his residence was in the camp, and he'd walk through the camp. And when he walked through the camp, all of a sudden people knew it's time to come to the door. And they would go to the door of their tents. And they would watch they'd watch Moses walk through the camp. He was headed for the tent of meeting. And it says that God met with Moses and spoke to him just like you and I speaking together here, face to face. Well, who's attending the tent of the meeting? Who's in charge of that? Joshua. And so day in and day out, Joshua watches this procession. Moses would come out when he had to meet with God at the tent of meeting. The people would all actually come out to the doors of their tents. And then Moses would go into the tent of meeting, and the cloud signifying the presence of God would come down over that tent of meeting, and everybody would kneel down at their households. They'd kneel down and start worshiping God and what was going on in that tent. And who's standing outside the tent there? Joshua. And God says to Joshua, just like I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you. The fond memories. Those were great times when God would come down and visit Moses. And then Moses would leave. But it says Joshua would hang around. He stayed there at the tent of meeting. I think he was just hoping maybe God would come back and meet with him. Well, guess what? That's going to happen for him now. He's arrived. And then it says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. When Joshua fails, and we all fail, God will never reject him. He won't cancel him. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. We lived in some real messed up times. Cancel people? Throw them out because they disagree with you or whatever? That's crazy. But the living God will never cancel you. He will never forsake you. Just as he did with Joshua, that promise is good for us. All right, moving on. The next part, God's expectations for Joshua. He's got 3 non-negotiables here, verses 6 through 8. Non-negotiable number 1. You remember those when you were in your job, first meeting with the boss, and he's told you, okay, this is the big picture. This is what I'm going to do for you. And now here's what you're going to do. This is what you're accountable for. These are non-negotiables. You are to be strong and courageous. You, Joshua, will give possession of this land to the people. Stand tall and confident. Be a strong leader. You've got to be an inspiration to my nation. This nation's going to need encouragement. They're going to need a strong guy up there up front. God swore to the patriarchs, it says. Verse 6, be strong and courageous, for I shall give the people possession of the land. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land, which I swore to their fathers to give to them. their fathers and their fathers, and he swore it to the patriarchs all the way back to Abraham. I have utter confidence in you, Joshua, that you're going to do this. No question. I told all these people, all the way from Abraham, all the way to the last generation, that they were going to get this promised land. And you know who was on my mind for the last 400 years to make this happen? You. As Tom would say, you the man, Joshua. Tag, you're it. So, how encouraging that you have a boss that actually believes in you. Do you ever have a boss that actually trusted and believed in you? What a difference did that make in your performance on your job? And so, God is, God is saying, I'm behind you 100%, and He means it. Okay. I couldn't help but reflect on, when I was preparing here, Paul, when he gave his life story to us in 40 minutes or whatever it was, 2 weeks ago. He had a time, I hope you don't mind me rehashing this a little bit, Paul, where he was working in a garage, and he was working on an engine. I don't remember all the details, but there was some gasoline involved, and all of a sudden there was a fire, and all of a sudden the fire got ugly, and a lot of stuff kind of got damaged in the building and whatnot. And he went and he worked all night long. He was cleaning everything up, doing as much as he could do to restore it. The boss was coming in the next morning. It's a big deal. And the boss comes in, and Paul said, I thought I was going to get fired. I was packing my bags, going to hit the road, catch the next gig I could get to. And the boss comes in and says, what are you doing? Well, I screwed up here, and I'm just going to have to get out of here. I know what you're going to say. He goes, what are you talking about? You had a fire. You did what was right. I'm behind you 100%. Put your tools back. Get back to work. Get this place cleaned up. Get back on track. I call that guy a Barnabas. I don't even remember his name. A Barnabas, what do I mean? Barnabas, a son of encouragement. I've had a few Barnabases in my life that have, just like Paul experienced, have stepped alongside. When you screwed up, they're there to help you pick up the pieces, get you moving again. Barnabases are probably worth their weight in gold. Long before Promise Keepers brought that term up and everything, it became a kind of a cliche term. You knew who those guys were that you could count on, you could go to. If you've got that gift of being a Barnabas, you're not up here in the front usually, you're out there. But man, we need you. And God says, I got utter confidence in you, because He's the ultimate Barnabas. He believes in us. All right, non-negotiable number 2. Be careful to do according to all that's in the law. God's word at that time, only be strong and courageous. Number 2, I think He's trying to tell Joshua something. Be strong and courageous. Remember I said that about 5 minutes ago? Be strong and courageous. You're going to need that. Why? Is the law so important? Because there's God's way, and then there's the other way. But why do I have to be strong and courageous? Because it takes a strong, courageous leader to stand against the flood tide of pluralism and relativism, who will stress the importance of obedience to God's written word. That's a mouthful. All I'm saying there is we're looking for leaders who can stand up and say, this is what the Word of God says. Your culture is messed up, and you've got to do what God says, period. Be careful to do according to all of the law. We call that obedience. I know that's a foreign word, I think, nowadays, but it's called obedience. Don't turn to the right or the left. In other words, stay locked on target. Don't get off track. Don't get off in the minutia. Don't get into the weeds. Stay on target. Stay on target. And watch out that you don't add stuff to the scriptures and don't take away from the scriptural teaching. Stay accurate to the texts, period. And then finally, God's last conditional promise for success, wherever he would go, was, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it, for then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. The third non-negotiable, the book of the law. This book, it was that big back then. That's all they had, was that little chunk. And they didn't have very many of them because it was on papyrus. So they had to listen to the word. For the vast majority of what they learned was some priests would read the word to them. And you know what they didn't have? Excuse me, I had my prop. They didn't have one of these. We live and die by these things, it seems like. But you know what these things do? They clutter our mind. We don't have to memorize anything because it's right here. Do you know how many trillion terabytes that we have to process every day? That's an exaggeration. Obviously, I'm going way over the top. But the amount of information we process compared to Joshua's time period that the normal person would process is staggering. So when they heard the word, they could immediately memorize it. They had the capabilities of doing that because they didn't have all this other stuff in their memory banks. So what they did was most of them didn't read and write and they didn't have access to it, they memorized it. But that's not good enough. God says, you need to meditate on this book day and night. Meditate. When I heard that phrase, it reminded me of an old, not Campus Crusade, but Navigators word hand illustration from the 1970s. Some of you got back here ought to remember that. And so it goes like this. Your hand is the illustration. And so if you read the word, or if you hear the word, just hearing the word, that's like your little pinky here. Okay, and you want to get a grasp on the word. I can't hold that very well with my little pinky. I can't even do it I'm not supposed to use my thumb yet. See, I've got it a little bit here, but I'm using my other hand to support it. But that's better than nada, okay? At least you heard it. Now if you read it, we can add the ring finger. Now we're getting a little better, okay? But now, if I study it, that's what the Navigators would say. You can read that, but why don't you put a little more effort into it? Now I can add my middle finger. I'm still missing the thumb and the index, but I can get a pretty good handle on it. But now if I memorize it, and Navigators were key on memorization, now I got 4 fingers on this guy. But if I meditate, I add the thumb. Now I've got it. God says meditate. I think God has a sense of humor. I know God has a sense of humor. About 2/3 of you probably have the same problem I have. I get up about 2 in the morning to use the facilities. James, you don't have that problem. 1/3 of the older guys here don't have that problem either, but the other 2/3 know what I'm talking about. And then I go back to bed, and I can't get back to sleep. But it's been a blessing for me, actually, because you know what I find I do between 2 and 3:30 or whatever when I can actually get back to sleep? I'm meditating on Scripture. I got stuff going through my mind all the time. This message was going through my mind big time at that 2 in the mornings. And it's a great time to use that why worry about stuff that you can't control anyway? Why don't you meditate on His Word? All right. So, and the other thing meditation does, it's our QC mechanism. QC, that's quality control. Because while you're meditating on the Word, you're going to think about stuff you did during the day or the day before or stuff that's gone on. And you go, QC, quality control check. How did I do in my life versus what the Word of God said that day? What could I have done differently? And so that's a real positive when you get to the level where you're reading, reading, studying, memorizing, and meditating on it. It'll change your life. It'll revolutionize it. All right. The last of the last here. Finally, God rhetorically asked Joshua, have I not commanded you? It's like, are you listening? Now, when your boss says that to you, you kind of go, I better wake up again. He goes, I'm going to repeat it. Be strong and very courageous. We're in verse 9. Don't tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Do not fear or tremble. What's that descriptive of? It's a 4-letter word. It's called fear. Fear is our enemy. It's our biggest giant. It was probably his biggest giants were real ones. But fear was bigger than them. And so God is saying, you can't let fear rule your life. You just cannot do that. What's it look like? Fear is paralyzing. It's a giant we face every day in our lives. It's somebody who's dismayed. That means they're worried or in distress. They might be shaking. They might be speaking up here. No, I'm just kidding. Or trembling. Fear can be paralyzing. It can lead you to panic, wide-eyed terror. Induces a shot of adrenaline in your system, your blood pressure goes up, blah, 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 okay? It's not good. It's good when the dinosaur's chasing you. But when you don't have a dinosaur chasing you and you got fear, that's the problem. 1998, I finished a graduate school I was going to, and my wife and I took a vacation down to Playa del Carmen in Mexico. Loved Mexico, loved that whole area down there. And we're scuba divers, and so we had arranged to take the ferry across over to Cozumel. And Cozumel's got some world-class dives there. And so we went, and one of the dives, we were on what's called a 6-pack, so there were 6 divers, so my wife and I, 4 other divers, and then there's a dive master that goes with you. And one of the sites we went to was called the Devil's Throat. You may know that, you may not, I don't know. You can Google it, there's tons of information on Devil's Throat. So get our gear on, we drop down. We meet up at the bottom down at about 85 feet. It's a pretty deep dive. So we get down to 85 feet. The 6 of us would gather around a hole about the size of your tables right there, something like that, maybe a little bigger. I remember it as being that small, about that big, but it may have been a little bit bigger. And the idea is you're going to go down this hole, and then you come out at 125 feet on a wall down there. It's a phenomenal dive. I do not like confined spaces. That's not my thing. I don't like caves, as you know. So when you talk about phobias and fear and stuff like that, we're kind of gathered around this hole like these chairs, and then the dive master goes down go his flippers. Next person, and then next thing I know, I'm in this tube. No flashlights or anything. We're going down. It's pitch black. How do you think I'm feeling right now? You think maybe my blood pressure's going up a little bit? And yeah, it was. So you got to focus on something. I'm focusing on the fins in front of me, right? Because I can't even see the dive master. He's way ahead, you know. It's like, oh man, how did I get down here? What am I doing? This is crazy. I'm about 100 feet down, and I'm going to have a panic attack. This is nuts. And then we break through. We come out at the other end, you know, and one at a time we come out of this. And I've never seen, I said, I must have died when I went through there because I'm in heaven. This is just, it was absolutely stunning. You could see a couple 100 feet of visibility, absolute turquoise water. You looked around, just nothing but coral and amazing stuff along this wall. You come off on this wall, you're at 125 feet, you're just hovering like a blimp out there. And then you look down and it goes, this sheer cliff just goes to black. And you're going, is God awesome or what? And that fear just kind of melts away. That moment of fear going down 20 seconds, 30 seconds of going down the tube kind of just evaporated. We need to keep our eyes on the big picture, on God, and then your fears kind of become de minimis. We all face them. So we're coming back up the wall, and we go in through a couple of caverns. Now, caverns are different than what we had just gone down. Caverns have an opening so you can see light through them, and so those don't bother me at all. I don't know, something about going into a black hole I just don't like. So anyway, we come in, and the dive master takes us up through there, and then he goes like this. He points. Actually, they ding on their tank. It's kind of, they all have a little steel rod, and they go bing, 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 and then that catches your attention, and he points. And here at the entrance to this little cavern, before we're going to go and do our, go back to the surface, some poor shellfish or something died down there, but here is a cross. I'm not kidding you, just right there. And it's in whatever the inside of the shell. It was, very shiny, kind of metallic-looking color, and it just was a shell that got embedded there and had been there for years and years and years. I'm sure hundreds of people had seen this thing, but to me it was like, yep, there's the cross. It's your presence, God, that gets you through this stuff, and that's what He says. I am with you everywhere, even 100 feet down. Don't forget it. You don't need to follow the dive master. You need to follow the master. Thank you for your attention. We're going to dive into these life-changing questions here. I guarantee you they are going to, I hope they're better than Rogaine. I might get some hair back, Anyway, I'll be back here in, about 20 minutes or so, and have a great discussion. Thanks, guys. Oh, thank you.
Good work.